Fans were shocked when Frank Fritz was fired from American Pickers in March 2020, but that was just a drizzle before the real storm hit. In September 2024, news of his death sent shockwaves through the collector's world. As sad as his death was, it wasn't even the most shocking part. Rumors about Frank's last words sent chills down the spines of those who heard them. And just when it seemed like the shock couldn't get any worse, his estate revealed something so shocking that it... Before we talk about the discoveries that left everyone speechless, let's remember one of the most passionate collectors the world has ever seen. Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1963 in Davenport, Iowa. He was different from other kids his age because he was naturally curious. While most kids his age were playing flyball and reading the newest comic books, Frank was looking for history. If something had a story, no matter how small or important, he wanted to know it. Whether it was old coins, rusty beer cans, used stamps, or even razor blades that were no longer useful, he thought everything had a story, a place in someone's life before they came to this world, and he wanted to know everything about it. As he got older, his interest grew, and he went from collecting small things like coins and stamps to collecting bigger things like motorcycles, dirt bikes, and rare memorabilia that held a lot of history on their worn-out surfaces. Flea markets, estate sales, and any old barn off a forgotten highway became his playground. Most people saw Frank knocking on the door ready to dig through the dust as an odd hobby, but to Frank it was a calling. But things took a strange turn when he didn't jump right into the world of antiques. Instead, life pulled him in a different direction. For almost 25 years, he worked as a fire inspector in Iowa. It was a serious, no-nonsense job that required attention to detail and a dedication to keeping people safe. But no matter how much time he spent checking, he was in charge of fire codes and inspecting buildings, but his love of collecting never went away. In fact, his job made it even stronger because every day he went into old firehouses, abandoned warehouses, and forgotten buildings that were full of hidden gems, waiting for someone like him to bring them back to life. That's when he started collecting firehouse memorabilia, like helmets with soot-stained leather and vintage fire alarms that used to go off, and Frank hunted them all down. Soon he realized he was onto something bigger than just a personal collection. These relics weren't just interesting, they were valuable. So he slowly started buying and selling them, turning his hobby into a side business. Soon the idea of making his hobby his career began to creep in. At this point, he had been working a steady job for years, but he knew where his heart was. It wasn't easy to quit, but the pull of his true passion was stronger, so he went for it and opened Frank's Finds, a small antique shop that specialized in firefighters' gear and rare collectibles. At first, it was just a small step toward something new, but he didn't know that that little store would become the start of a career that would soon take him on treasure hunting adventures and eventually the kind of fame he never saw coming. Before American Pickers made Frank Fritz famous, he was just a guy with an eye for hidden treasures and a love for... Frank Wolf, also from Iowa, was obsessed with the same things Frank was. The two men weren't best friends at first, but their love of picking brought them together over time. Mike had a big vision. He saw picking as more than just a hobby. He saw it as a way of life that could be turned into something huge. While Frank was busy filming his treasure hunting adventures and pitching a TV show to anyone who would listen, it took some convincing, but eventually Frank joined the show. What began as two guys hitting the road in search of lost treasures turned into a reality TV hit. When American Pickers premiered on the History Channel in 2010, it was a huge hit. Over 3.1 million people watched the first episode, making it one of the network's biggest debuts ever. But the show's magic wasn't just in the antiques. It was in Mike and Frank's relationship, which they had been building for years. Respect was given to them for their fair deals and deep knowledge. Now that cameras were rolling, they were taking viewers along for the ride. Mike was a businessman who was always looking for the next big-ticket item. Frank, on the other hand, was the heart of the operation, He had a way of making people feel at ease, which turned tense negotiations into friendly conversations. He wasn't just interested in the money. He genuinely cared about the stories behind the items they found, which made him a fan favorite. For more than 10 years, American Pickers was a must-see. Every week, Frank and Mike would hit the road to look for hidden treasures in barns, garages, and junkyards, with Danielle Colby holding down the fort at Antique Archaeology. The three of them had a great relationship. They weren't just business partners. They were friends pursuing their passion together. But every road trip ends, and for Frank, the journey continued. A journey that seemed endless at first took a turn that no one saw coming. The first signs that something was wrong with American Pickers didn't make people worry right away. Frank Fritz's last appearance was in March 2020, but most viewers thought he'd be back soon because the world was so unpredictable at the time. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, Frank was going through a series of problems that would change everything. Frank Fritz never talked much about his personal problems, but over time, some things became clear. For years, fans saw his weight going up and down. Some thought it was just part of getting older, while others thought something was seriously wrong. Eventually, Frank revealed that he had Crohn's disease, a long-term condition that affects the digestive system and is painful, unpredictable, and tiring. At first, Frank tried to control it by following a strict diet, which helped him lose 65 pounds. But Crohn's isn't something you can just fix. You have to fight through the pain and fatigue every day. Health problems and uncertainty were always there, but he never let them stop him from doing what he loved. Fame changes everything, and for Frank, it wasn't always for the better. When American Pickers took off, he wasn't just a guy looking for antiques. He was a reality TV star. Everyone knew him and expected him to be the same funny, fun-loving guy they saw on TV. What they didn't see was the pressure that came with fame. Frank admitted that being in the spotlight made him anxious, and over time, it took a toll. But it wasn't until 2020 that things really went south for Frank. His health got so bad that he had to have major back surgery, which included 185 stitches, 2 rods in his spine, and a recovery process that would last months. On top of that, he was dealing with personal problems like addiction. So at first, his absence seemed like a short break to heal and get back on his feet. But as the 21st season of American Pickers went on without him, fans started to wonder why he wasn't back. Then in July 2021, Mike Wolf made it official. Frank wasn't coming back. Mike released a statement saying he'd miss Frank and wished him the best, but Frank didn't believe him. In an interview, he called Mike's words hollow and dropped a bombshell that shocked fans. Throughout his entire recovery, Mike had never once called to check on him. They had worked together for decades, but Frank had never once. It was clear that they had never been as close as people thought. They were just two guys who loved the thrill of the hunt, taking back roads to find lost treasures and sharing a dream. Despite everything, their bond was still there, maybe buried under years of anger, but never truly broken. By September 2024, Frank's health had reached a breaking point. After years of fighting illness, his body was too weak to fight anymore. Those closest to him knew the end was near, and when the call came, Mike didn't hesitate. He rushed to help. Frank's mother and a close family friend were also there. The room was quiet and heavy with unspoken words and the weight of everything they had been through over the years. Things between Frank and Mike had been complicated for years, but at that moment, it didn't matter. All that was left was their friendship, the real one behind the cameras and headlight. Mike later said that he was holding Frank's hand when he died and whispered to him that he loved him, forgiven him, and that everything was okay. Frank was gone before he died. His last words, "The past is never really gone. It's always with us, hiding in the shadows," were both unsettling and meaningful. Coming from a man who had spent his life finding lost treasures, they felt almost poetic. His loved ones still think about them and wonder what he was thinking in those last moments. According to his death certificate, Frank died of complications from his stroke. He had also been suffering from a condition called aortic stenosis. Even simple things like walking, breathing, and standing were hard for him because his body had been through so much and was fighting every step of the way, but in the end it just couldn't take it any longer. But while his death marked the end of an era, what was found in his estate afterward was so shocking that not even his closest friends and family could believe it. You see, Frank loved motorcycles, but not many people knew how big his collection had become after he died. When the doors to his private garage were opened, finally opened, what they found shocked even the people who knew Frank best. Rows and rows of old motorcycles filled the room, some lovingly restored and shining under the lights, others covered in dust waiting for their chance to shine again. There were rare Indian motorcycles, classic Harley-Davidsons, and custom choppers that Frank had collected with great care over the years. Some bikes had been fully restored, while others were still in pieces in the middle of a project, showing that Frank's passion for these machines never went away. He had traveled across the country to find them, spent years restoring them, and held on to them like precious relics from a bygone era. The thought of them being sold seems almost unimaginable to those who knew how much they meant to him. However, sources say that an auction is already in the works, and every bike, vintage sign, and carefully preserved piece of history will go under the hammer. But here's the part that no one saw coming. The money from the auction will be used to They won't go into a private estate or business fund. Instead, they'll be given to charity, which was Frank's career goal and one last act of kindness.